Okay? So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce our next guest, Art Smalley. He is Principal of Art of Lean. He is also an expert in the area of world-class methods for operational improvement. He is the author of Creating Level Pull and also a co-author of A3 Thinking and Toyota Kaizen Methods, 6 Steps to Improvement. It is such an honor, Art, to have you here today. I can't even begin to thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with our suppliers. And so with that, I'd like to have you all welcome him to the stage now.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, well, thank you for the very kind introduction and the opportunity to come and speak here today. I enjoy meeting and speaking with all types of groups as long as you have a passion and interest in improving. Whatever the topic is, whatever the industry is, I'm game for the talk. And fortunately, I live locally here. I live in Huntington Beach, so it's a nice, easy commute for me today. And I look forward to the conversation. I've only got 45 minutes, so I'll probably move quickly. But I'd like to reserve at least a little bit of chunk of time at the end for some Q&A, if that works out, time permitting. Let me check my start time. Okay. Okay, so today's topic, I was asked to talk about just excellence in lean in general. And the subtitle or working title for this, which I didn't put on the screen, is kind of the notion that operational excellence, or lean, so to speak, is for free. At least it pays for itself. And you might laugh that there's nothing free in the world, and I understand that. There's always a little bit of training cost or some implementation cost involved. And at the very minimum, there's hard work and sweat equity involved. But there was a famous man in the 1980s who got out in front of the quality movement named Phil Crosby. And probably a lot of you remember him. He was famous for coining the term zero defects and quality is free. And what he meant by quality is free, that the benefits from doing this far outweigh the cost. It wasn't that it was truly zero cost in terms of doing it, but the benefits from doing it so outweigh the cost that you're kind of crazy not to do it. And he'd learned that on his own with the Pershing missile program. I think it was at Martin Company in Florida back in the 70s and 80s. So the outline today, this brief introduction. I'm assuming at least part of the room has no idea who I am or my background. So I'll just do one slide, introduce myself. I want to go through what I consider kind of the first principles or main questions of lean or the Toyota production system are. Because I think this is where people kind of get lost sometimes. You always have to go back to first principles and make sure you're on course with this stuff. I'll talk a little about the concept of roadmaps and what you got to watch for and be careful about. I asked if I could visit one of the SEA companies, and I got to visit Hickson Metal Finishing a couple weeks ago. And there were some requested topics from the audience that could you touch upon this? And again, time permitting, I'll answer those very briefly. And then I'll conclude with some summary advice, and then I hope to carve out some time for Q&A at the end if there's anything of particular interest to you. Okay. Look, my background is very, very fortunate. You look at people, you say, is that guy good or is he lucky? And honestly, especially the first part of my life, I fell into the lucky category. Right out of college, I went to work for Toyota Motor Corporation in Japan. And there's a lot of people. There's tens of thousands of people around the world that can tell you they work for Toyota. There's a few thousand that can tell you they went to Japan for training. But I'm one of a handful of people, less than a dozen, who actually speak, read, and write Japanese. I lived in the country for 10 years. And I worked for the Kamigo engine plant. And I was the only full-time employee, foreign national employee, they called us, who spent 5 years in that plant. And just pure blind dumb luck, I got placed in this facility. And it was Taiichi Ohno's model engine plant. Okay? Everything that you read about, the kind of the derivative of lean, and the Toyota production system, where it came from, the majority of that came out of his machining shop. Casting, forging, machining, and assembly of engines, and spread outwards from there. So I had a very, very lucky and fortunate start to my career. I helped Toyota start up plants in Kentucky, Australia, Indonesia, and did some indirect support work for the UK and other places. After about a decade in Japan, I decided I wanted to come back to America and work with an American company that wanted to improve. And I became a director of lean for a company called Donnelley Corporation. And Donnelley today is part of Magna. So you won't find it if you go looking for a Donnelley. But 15 years ago when I went there, it was actually a pretty poor performing supplier. We were one of the worst in our industry groupings. Honda, like to call us one of their dirty dozen, bottom dozen suppliers. And we were not good by any stretch of the imagination. But after 5 years of hard work and a lot of the things I'm going to talk about to you today, we were significantly better. Profit-wise, quality-wise, any dimension you want to talk about, delivery-wise. Honda actually laughed. They wound up giving us Supplier of the Year after a 5-year improvement journey. And the guy, honestly, when he handed us the plaque, he said, I never thought you guys would get this. After that experience of helping turn around Donnelly Corporation, I decided, well, gee, this is kind of fun. I like doing this as the internal lean guy, but I want to see if I can help other companies. And I spent a few years with the big, the blue suit consulting company of McKinsey & Company, and I really enjoyed my time there. And that was where I got my first kind of taste of the aerospace industry. We did a fair amount of work in the aerospace sector. But I was across many different platforms, electronics, oil and gas, pulp and paper. I saw in my 5 years of McKinsey, I saw a little bit of everything. And it interested me, and I liked the work. The trouble is McKinsey and those companies are so darn expensive that you don't stay with any one company for very long. So around 2003, I said, I want to just split off and do this on my own, start helping companies. And I founded my own company called Art of Lean. It's just a play on my name, Art Smalley and Lean Manufacturing. Because I think there's a little bit of science and a little bit of art to doing this well. And I like to help companies think their way through the journey. And right off the bat, my friend Jim Womack, who had a previous relationship, let me publish a book through his institute, become a faculty on the Lean Enterprise Institute, and help get me off on the right foot in my career. And what I've done the last 8 years is serve a variety of clients, write some articles and books whenever I get a request, and I feel like I have some knowledge to add on a certain topic. I try and accept speaking engagements like this one to the extent that I can, and I help companies training improvement workshops for a variety of different ways. Push that twice. Okay, so let's go on to the next part of this. I want to go into what I call the they warned me I might have trouble clicking. Can you advance it one for me? Yeah. I want to go into what I call the first principles or 8 questions. And these are things I'd like you to ask yourself as you go down any improvement journey. Okay? And these aren't answers. I phrase them as questions intentionally because this is where I said the hard work and the sweat equity comes involved. You have to be very careful of anybody, whether it's me or another consultant, giving you answers for any situation. Okay? And I think you can download this presentation later if I understand correctly. If not, I'll put it on my website and you can download it this evening. But one of the things you have to struggle with and answer properly in order to do this well and make that notion that it'll pay for itself work right is figure out how you satisfy the customer and obtain a profit. And again, it's a very simple question, but it's very hard to do. I mean, it's very easy to satisfy the customer and go broke. You can throw dollar after dollar after solving problems and doing what the customer wants. You can go broke. Conversely, you can do a lot of short-term things that'll make the bottom line look better, but at the end you might lose your customers as a result from that. And you as an executive or leader, operational leader for your company, you have to constantly wrestle with this and figure out what the right question is, okay, and how to achieve this balance. And this was actually where the Toyota production system started, okay? Because the truth is, it doesn't matter where I go, automotive, aerospace, electronics, pulp and paper, wherever I go, everybody's telling me the same thing. The supplier requirements are 100% on time, 100% quality, shorter lead time. We want you to be able to flexibly respond to changes. We want you to have price cost improvements on an annual basis, and we want some kind of good spirit of working relationship together. So it's a journey together. And that's difficult. Okay? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to say this is easy. It may be simplistic to say, but it's not necessarily easy to do. But those who can do this well will separate themselves from the competition. And Toyota had to work hard on this. I'm not going to pretend they did it overnight either if you study the history. Yeah, okay. Well, I went twice. Okay, back one for me. Oh, I'm sorry, that was the right one. Yeah. What they had to drill into the heads of their employees was what was called the cost-plus principle, and this quit working in any industry decades ago. But let's say you make a widget and sell it for $10, and then the cost for you to make that widget is $8. Well, it leaves you a theoretical profit margin of $2. Okay, that's good. Maybe it's not that high. In some industries, maybe it's too high. It's just a hypothetical point for illustration. But the point is, if you want to increase your profits, in this case, so if you just tack on 4 to this, you come up with a higher sales price of $12 per widget. It's nice, it's wishful thinking, but who can get away with this, especially in today's economy, the last 10 or 20 years? It just won't last for long. Okay? The barriers to entry aren't high enough. Unless you have some kind of magnificent patent or superior technology or your monopoly, this just isn't going to work for anybody, and didn't work for Toyota. And they started off realizing this back in 1950 when they were very unprofitable, very much a struggling car manufacturer and very low in terms of productivity compared to the United States. What they did over the years, is convince their employees and management that you have to think about this in the opposite way. And again, there's exceptions to every rule, of course. I can argue shades of gray on all of this, but you had to convince the entire company and the working management that, look, a sales price of $10 for our widget is what it is. If the cost is $8 to make that and our profit is $2, if we got to be more profitable, if we got to get to $4 a profit, well, we got to get down to a cost structure of 6. Okay? It's called the cost reduction principle. And the difference is, we're not passing that on down to the customer. In many cases, that just simply isn't possible. And there's no way Toyota could command any price premium in the 1950s or 60s. They were extremely a value play in the market, and they had to be lower cost than everybody. So for them to earn a profit, they had to think this way. And as trivial and as simple as the equation is, every employee in Toyota understood this. This was day one of company training. This is one of the first slides I saw when I entered Toyota Corporation in Japan in the 1980s. And I still remember it to this day. And not only did they show me the slide or a version of this, that every supervisor I ever worked for drilled this into my head again and again and again and again and again. And the phrase was in Japanese that we'll wring water out of a stone. Right? There's a proverb in Japanese, we will wring water out of a stone if we have to. And you almost have to embrace that kind of mindset if you want to be good at this. Okay? The other way of thinking about this or explaining it is the following. You can tell your production employees or managers or anybody about this. Let's say we need to increase production in some way. And we currently have one man, one machine, work for 1 hour, and they can produce 100 units of whatever you make. Okay? Well, we want to make more. How do we do that? If you have to ask this in a classroom setting to workers or even engineers or managers, number one, the top 3 answers are always we need more workers, need more machines, or we got to work longer. And what's the problem with these first 3 answers? Yeah, it's all additive. It all adds cost. They're quantity-based approaches. In some way, shape, or form is going to add cost to the bottom line. And some people then say, well, gosh, that means, boss, you want me to work harder. And then the truth is Toyota didn't want that either. Yeah, they're going to optimize you, absolutely. But the answer isn't working harder because it's not sustainable. That just leads to repetitive stress injuries, mistakes, and all kinds of problems. You can burst. You can sprint forward for a short period of time, but there's only one way to improve in the long run if you want to do it and reduce cost, and that's to eliminate the waste, the fifth answer. Make work easier, make work simpler, eliminate the waste. Whatever you want to spin or twist you want to put on those words, you have to simplify it and get the waste out of the process in order to make improvement. And it is possible. Okay? Not in every case, but in the vast majority of cases, we are always able to wring more out of that stone than we thought possible. The second thing kind of behind this, and the presentation before lunch alluded to this as well, there's an embedded assumption and thing I notice about companies and individuals that succeed with lean. And it's the problem of what are you going to work on first? What are your main problems, or what are you going to focus on first? And there's no training in the world that can do this. There's no consultant. I can't give you the answer for that. I just don't have enough knowledge of your situations or equipment or your customers or your suppliers. But you have to be skilled at figuring out the right things to work on if you want to achieve success. And this has been stated a variety of different ways over the years, whether it's the Duran saying of sorting out the vital few from the trivial many, or the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule. Okay, it's all derivatives of the same thing. But the truth is all problems are not equal, and the truth is you got more problems than you know what to do with, okay, if you're honest with yourselves. If I ask you to create a flip chart, get all your work teams in a room, you'd come up with 100, 200, 1,000 problems to work on. The longer we spent in the room, the longer that list would get. And the problem is, as a management team, as an executive, your bandwidth, your time is limited. There is only 24 hours a day, and you can't work all of them. You run out of time, okay? You run out of energy, you run out of things. So successful companies are very, very good at sorting out a few things on the left-hand side and putting disciplined effort towards achieving those, whether it's cost, quality, on-time delivery, safety, health and welfare. I don't know what it is. But you have to sort out this vital few from the trivial many, whatever you're doing in life, if you want to achieve results and get it very fast. The number one problem I get to visit a lot of companies in Asia, North America, and Europe. Number one problem, I get too many people working far over on the right. working on the vital few, and they're very busy. I can look them in the eye, and they can tell me they're busy, and I can see they're busy, but they're not getting results. And it's a problem of not getting to root cause and not working on the right thing. So you have to embody this in some way, shape, or form, and the answer is not out there anywhere. It's in your operations and in your businesses somewhere. The other thing I like to accentuate is, back to Phil Crosby. If you're going to ask me one thing that tends to deliver bottom line impact the fastest for companies, short of mergers and acquisitions and financial things I could talk about, but just in operations, it's almost always quality. Phil Crosby had that saying, quality is free. Not exactly true. Everything costs a little bit. Sweat equity, hard work's involved. But if you work on quality, there's absolutely no extra cost involved. If you can reduce scrap, reduce rework, reduce problems shipped to the customer, get out of all this sorting and rework and stuff that goes on, it's a win-win for everybody. Employees don't like it, customers don't like it, managers don't like it. And this is the number one area I often have to tell clients, just slow down. I know you read this textbook about how to create the world's best pull system or how to do 5S or how to do TPM. But if your quality's not in shape first, I just don't think it's going to go very far. And this actually is the oldest part of the Toyota production system. Despite all the famous stuff that gets put on Teams and 5S or standardized work or pull systems, the fundamental principles of quality go back to predating the car company, back to 1902 when the founder Sakichi Toyota was building looms. He was just a high school graduate. He sketched and designed everything himself, built his companies from the bottom up. He bankrupted a few, succeeded with a few. It's his loom business which built the capital to start their car business. And his number one concept about anything was how you build in quality at the source. The same thing Phil Crosby was saying back in 1980. 0 defects and quality is free. Sakichi Toyota in 1902 saying if we make quality at the source and get it right the first time, we're going to have a productivity advantage on everyone. And I agree with that. In a hierarchy of things, I tend to worry about quality first. The framework for that in Toyota, was look, whatever it is, human or machine, we're gonna design it and think about it in such a way that it's almost impossible for a defect to get through. And there's no one answer that works for anybody. You have to have proper work instructions, standards, and training as a starting point, but that alone is not sufficient. That won't get you to the quality levels that your customers are going to ask for today. Toyota was very good at, and a lot of companies are good at putting simple error-proofing devices to catch mistakes that are commonly made in operations. But the thing that Toyota's not as well known for, and they're actually very good at, is high process capability. Back to the Six Sigma world, what they were trying to accomplish with their Six Sigma level of quality and high CPKs. When I worked at Toyota, you could not find a machine under 1.33. Our average machine CPK in the machine shop where I worked was about 1.5, 1.67, and this was back in the 1980s. They were very, very good at this, which makes, to me, some of their recent quality problems all the more shocking. The other thing on top of that is they had some tremendous things called stop the line. This was the jidoka, the Japanese buzzword I'm not too fond of, but they had this stop the line capability that even on top of the three things I've talked about so far, you're still going to have defects that get through the line. And they wanted to have machines with sensory capability in certain places to catch defects, stop abnormalities in process where you could take a look at them, or at least in the manual processes have a way the operator would be trained to stop the machine. Stop buttons, cords, pull it, stop it, and catch the defect in station. Because that's probably the best time you have to solve a problem. It's not a month later when you get the scrap report. It's not a week later when the supervisor comes out or the customer complains about it. It's not the end of the shift when the manager comes out and hears about it. It's like a crime scene. If you keep the crime scene clean and you get the detectives there and there's physical evidence and you can look at it in the first couple hours, there's a good chance they'll resolve the crime in the first day or two. If they don't, it may not ever get solved, or it may take a month or longer. And on top of this, Toyota, like everybody, had a very good quality control system with layered audits. Production did their audits for first part checks, after tool change checks. They had time-based intervals. They had frequency-based intervals that the production did. And on top of that, QC was always checking on top of production. And QC could come in and shut down our lines whenever the process capability hit certain trigger points. And I spent many weekends in Toyota plants just because QC found a problem on Friday. I had all kinds of great golf plans set for Saturday and Sunday. And Friday afternoon, 4 o'clock, QC locked out a machine I was in charge of. Spent the whole weekend in the plant getting that straightened out. But that's the kind of thing that they expected in Toyota. The next thing that Toyota is famous for is the trendy buzzword is the whole just-in-time concept, the flow, the takt time, the pull systems, and level production, and it's all four of that gets put together and couched under the principle of just-in-time. And it's true. I mean, everybody's going to ask you, how are you going to do just-in-time delivery 100% to your supplier? And it's not an easy game by any means. Toyota worked on this for a long time. I can give you stereotypical pictures of what it looked like to be a supplier to Toyota. Go one forward. There's a series of 8 pictures here, and if you were a supplier to Toyota, the truck backed up to the dock at a designated time. You had a 10-minute window. You had to deliver at that dock at Toyota within your 10-minute window, or you were dinged for not being on time to Toyota. The truck backed in. It was unloaded from the side of the truck because that was faster than unloading from the back. It went onto a little vehicle, we'll call it a tugger, which had 8, 10 carts behind it. That tugger was loaded up. It immediately went into the final assembly of Toyota. It had a 2-hour route through the plant. Several of these tuggers were, of course, serving different parts of the facility. The tugger driver would get off and unload the material directly to a flow rack. Okay, the operator did not stop working. The driver had to deliver the material in a usable form. The operator in number 4, as soon as they used the parts that slid down to them, would pull out this Kanban card, this signal card or instruction card indicating they were using it, put it into a special post near their work area. Hourly, those posts were picked up and then taken to a sorting machine where an automated kind of bar-coded sorting machine scanned it. And this is 1989 we made this video, as I recall. And even back then, we were sending electronic signals to a lot of suppliers. People always assume it's a manual card, paper card system. It's just not true. There's plenty of cases where cards internally are manual paper. Sometimes with suppliers, if they're close enough, Toyota exchanged paper ones. But over distances and certain key suppliers, that was all done electronically. And here you see on the next page, this is the actual footage we shot of the Kanban instruction being printed out at the supplier now, and then would go to a scheduling box, heijunka box in Japanese, a scheduling box, which was manual. The card would be pulled at a fixed time interval, equating to the rate or line speed of Toyota's final assembly plant, be taken to their assembly area, their line or U-shaped cell, whatever they had. The operator in number 5 would receive that instruction, start making the parts as indicated on the card, and every work cell was probably able, of making several different types, depending upon how many different Toyota lines they were supplying. The parts would go to a finished goods store. They would go to a shipping lane and be staged for shipping and then loaded for a truck. And again, everything was done within these 10-minute shipping windows. You had to leave on time if you wanted to arrive at Toyota on time, and it was very tightly managed. And in the best supplier cases, this was measured in hours of inventory. And this is Japan, Toyota City. North America, there's bigger markets and stuff involved. But at its best, Toyota was managing hours of inventory between it and its suppliers, and deliveries were, some suppliers, as frequent as every 2, every 3 hours, something like that. And this is what they became famous for. I think it's a neat part of their system, but I think it actually distracts people in many cases. Get too caught up on this, we ignore the other stuff. The other thing that this kind of assumes, other than the quality aspect, is you have to have very good process availability and uptime. That's something, again, that kind of gets missed in some companies or people talking about lean. We talk too much about the flow and the just-in-time aspect. It's a given that your process availability is up around 100%, okay, in order for this to work. And the concept is, that number really depends. 100% available when needed is what you're quoted, but of course that's different department by department. If you're an assembly line, there's very little downtime. It's just a chain-driven conveyor and not a lot of difficult technology on it. So you might have an assembly line that's expected to be at 98, 97% of the time. Very, very minimal downtime on that line. In the capital-intensive shops where I came out of, the forging, casting, and the machining, the bar we were held to is 85% uptime. You had to be up 100% of that 85% expected uptime. The other 15% was what was allowed for the downtime, minor stops, changeover time, quality check time, or any time minor cleanup that had to go on. And if you didn't meet this, it was very tightly controlled and graded. And this is one of the ways that Toyota was very good about their capital productivity. When I came back to the States in the mid-1990s, and I got to visit Ford and GM and Chrysler and their engine facilities, it's very clear their number was much closer to 50, 60%, which equates to a big capital productivity advantage for Toyota. The 6th question I ask people, if you want to do this and you want to get the most bang for the buck, is then how do you standardize work practices, 100%? And the term standardized work gets thrown around a lot, and I think it's not really well understood. It's applied to everything. It's kind of a loosey-goosey definition. It's become a catch-all phrase, and my fear is that it doesn't cover everything that Toyota does well. The truth is that for any process in Toyota, there is very good technical documentation that comes out of engineering, and we call those work standards. It's not just work instructions, but technical work standards about the process parameters and control conditions and things that we know we have to do on this process to make it operate at that 1.5, 1.67 CPK level. Okay? We've practiced with these processes, we know them, we purchased them this way, we got the tooling figured out. When it hits the shop floor, we know all the technical parameters and stuff that we need to have in place to make it run the way it needs to fit our system. After those work standards are in place and it starts to get handed over to operations, before production, they're expected to create something called job instruction training. And job instruction training is not standardized work. It's something that Toyota got from the United States, and I'll talk about a little more in the following slide. It's a practice where from all those work standards, you break out what are the major steps, key points, and reasons why we do things this way in operations. So if there's a task that we ask any operator, any quality person, or any maintenance person to do, it's trained in from day one. Here are the major steps, here are the key points, and the reasons why. And we really, really, really work the reasons why hard. Because if you don't, if you just jump to the next level and write the standardized work, which has the what on it, and maybe a few key points, the operator doesn't understand why, and they start deviating it before you know it. But if you train people up front before the standardized work stuff comes in, the steps, the key points, and the reasons why, well, de facto, 80, 90% of the time, they're going to follow the standard a lot better than they will the other case. The thing that Toyota became famous for, because it's posted out on the shop floor in glorious view for everybody to see, is the standardized work chart. And this is where you add the time study elements to it. There's no time study with work standards or job instruction. This is like a layered cake or pyramid, if you want. The standardized work is where you take the elemental times and apply the industrial engineering thinking to this. You have the steps and the elemental times, and you optimize it to the takt time and have the theoretical right number of operators to run the line. And then, if that's not enough, on top of that, Toyota asks all their work teams to improve by a certain percent. Whatever it is, 5%, 7%, 10% this year, it's a thou shalt improve, 5%, 8%, 10% over the course of this year. And the only way to do that is to go back to these work standards, job instruction, standardized worksheets, and study the process, and think about how can I do this better. And there's always a way. There's always a way. On top of these, if that's not hard enough or difficult enough for you, the thing you have to work hard about if you want this to sustain and work and get the benefits you want is you have to be good at developing natural work team leaders. And this is actually, I think, the hardest part for Toyota or any company in the long run. That like 1 through 6, okay, hard enough, can be done in many cases, but where we stumble and fall down is when people retire, people rotate, company grows, we shuffle people around, and we don't have enough natural work team leaders developed. And if you trace the history of this, I've asked a lot of people that are now retired in Toyota, guys that are in their 70s and 80s that built up the system. I go, what was the thing that made the difference? And what started you guys off on this path? How did you develop your supervisory capability? It goes back to an old American training program called TWI, or Training Within Industry. And that training within industry material was transferred to Japan at the end of World War II. It trickled into Toyota around 1950, 1951, right when they're going through that bankruptcy and struggle period. And in their self-assessment, they realized that one of the problems was that their first line of supervision just wasn't that strong. Even if you got the great, AG Toyota and Taiichi Ohno over here, and you got some pretty good operators that in the middle, supervision just wasn't that strong. And they took this canned training from the United States, 3 10-hour classes, and started implementing this rigorously since 1950, and it was still in place when I left, okay? And it addressed 3 things. The top 2 are called knowledge components, knowledge of work and knowledge of responsibility, and we felt you only got that on the job. There's not much you can do in terms of training to ramp somebody up. You can't just overnight give people knowledge of work, knowledge of responsibility. That's the school of hard knocks. You get it through a variety of ways. But we did believe, and we proved year after year, we could teach people how to become better instructors, how do you become better at leading your work teams, and how do you become better at the skill of improving your work area. And this, a lot of people like to say, is the foundation for Kaizen and Toyota. We can dicker over the details, but there's a lot of truth to it, that if you can teach well, if you can lead well, if you can do small improvements in your area of control as a supervisor, you're starting on the right path to the Toyota production system. And if anybody's interested in this stuff, I think it's one of the greatest things since sliced bread. The TWI materials, you can actually download them for free from my website. The Train the Trainer manuals are there. There's a TWI Summit now annually. A lot of people are getting interested in this because this has been a missing equation in a lot of lean programs. No Japanese buzzwords in it. It's very simple, very straight, direct forward. It's 10-hour training courses spread out over 5 days, bite size. You can do it yourself. You can get together in groups and do it. There's a TWI Institute back in New York if you want to pay money and do that. But it's a great way to develop work team leaders and develop first-line skill and confidence in your company. The other thing that has to be figured out is how your company sustain and improve. And again, there's no magic bullet or single answer that I can give you. This has to be worked out for your situation. And the stereotypical things that you'll see in the good companies, Toyota included, is that some form of policy deployment, or the Japanese call it Hoshin Kanri, and Toyota did not develop it. Bridgestone, a lot of companies were doing this before Toyota was. If you have some way of taking things at the top management level of the company and translating them into very, very good targets and measures to be achieved, you translate those to your middle management so they have very good targets, plans, and measures to achieve those. You eventually cascade that down to your frontline management where they have very clear targets and plans and metrics to achieve. And you put that in some kind of plan, do, check, act cycle. Right? There's nothing mysterious about this. Plan, do, check, act, if you want to date it back to Stewart, to Deming, wherever you want to take it from. One of the most important things that Toyota learned in 1962 when they started studying that is that we have to embrace this as a methodical way of managing anything in our business, whether it's quality, productivity, annual planning, or anything. In my opinion, there are a lot of companies around the world that are good at this, especially at the executive level, but I've still yet to run across a company that takes it down to the first line as clearly and crisply as Toyota does. It was this clear in Toyota that if we had a productivity plan for the company to get this much better, that when Art Smalley showed up for my first 3 months of training at Toyota, I actually worked on the engine assembly line, that it was clear we were going to make 500 engines per day. And that translates into a certain rate per hour, certain translate rate per minute. And we as a team knew, because there's this counter up above our assembly line area, minute by minute, how are we doing throughout the day? And we were behind. Anytime you got X minutes behind, there was a threshold or flurry of activity that occurred. Triggers were reached. If you were within a certain plus-minus range, it was left to first line of supervision to figure out. You went beyond that. The manager was an alarm bell was going off in the management's office at Toyota, a red light, the most annoying thing in the world. But it got the manager out of their seat, and they were out there on the shop floor quickly, looking at what the problem was and directing either maintenance or engineering or doing what they had to make sure we started working on that problem now. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. And I've just, to my life, I've yet seen anything this disciplined and this crisp, and it didn't happen in Toyota automatically. This was trained in year after year. And when I started working at Donnelly Corporation, we didn't have this. We barely, year one, started to have a good annual planning process. Year two, we thought this was good quarterly, and we took it down through our vice presidents and plant managers. Year three, we thought we had a very good structured monthly process where the manufacturing managers started to own it and realizing what they were doing. And it was probably in the fourth year where the supervisor and work teams started to get the very crisp, clear understanding of what their task was in achieving our annual plan and what they had to deliver to us for us to achieve our plans. It's doable, but again, sweat equity, discipline, and hard work is the theme here. If you don't like my 8 questions, it's fine. It doesn't hurt my feelings. They're subjective. The Shingo Prize organization out of Utah State's done a nice job in the last few years. There used to be the Shingo Prize I wasn't that fond of, and they had a checklist where they assessed your facility. I didn't think it worked very well, but they've course-corrected and come up with a lot better ways to assess companies. And they have a 10-point checklist. And if this 10-point checklist resonates with you better, I ask you to self-assess yourself against these 10 things. Are you practicing respect for every individual? And you can look up on the Shingo website what they mean for this. Do you lead with humility? Are you open to learning and fixing problems and not just command and control from top down? Do you truly seek perfection? Are you shooting for 100% quality, 100% on-time delivery, and all these things? Do you assure quality at the source? Do you practice the concepts of flow and pull? Do you embrace the scientific method of thinking or Kaizen or improvement, whatever way you want to couch it? Do you focus on the process? Do you think systematically? Do you have a consistent purpose? And are you striving to create value for the customer? Or you can flip the inverse of that and say, are we eliminating waste so we can survive and do better as well? If that works for you, it's another way to think about the game. Another one I'm fond of, now that I look at it, is your SCA roadmap. This was sent to me and asked to take a look at it and understand it. And I understand that quite a few people are having success following this roadmap. And if it works, that's my number one thing. If it works, stick with it. Don't change golf clubs just because somebody else used them and they work. That's not a recipe for success. Copy what works for you. Copy what works for people similar to your situations. And this covers the majority of the major categories that I look for: leadership and culture, workforce development, operational excellence themes, and most importantly, business results. If you follow this, again, do it the right way and learn from companies that are doing this, again, you should achieve success. If you don't, you have to stop and ask why. If you take one thing out of this presentation, I guess it would be this chart, okay? Because this is the number one thing, not you in this room, but when I visit companies in North America in particular and Europe to a large extent, we have people either just starting this lean journey or they've been on it 5, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 years. And I ask them, where are you in terms of zones? And they say, well, we all started off in zone 1. We didn't have the results we wanted, and we had this kind of a roadmap or process approach to improvement. We didn't have anything there either. Okay? I'll admit we're sort of in zone 1. And the answer where they want to be is very clear too. We want to be in zone 4. We want to have a disciplined process we follow, but it's only good if we get results. The number one thing I see, though, when I visit companies and I either assess them or ask them to self-assess themselves, it becomes clear that all too many are winding up in what I call zone 2. They've developed the implementation process for going forward, and they fell in love with the buzzwords, the tools, the techniques, the thinking, but they aren't getting any results for it. And that's a shame. And that falls on us as leaders. We have to stop back and think, why is that? What are we doing wrong that's not enabling us to get results? Because in the end, if you don't get the results, it will come back and haunt you in the long run. The world's just too competitive. The world's just too small and too competitive a place for this day. And the journey to zone 4, again, I'm not going to pretend it's easy, but it's increased profitability of several percentage points. The companies that I've seen, we studied when I was at McKinsey & Company, it was several points of return on sales. If you were at 2, you could be 4. If you're at 0, it could be 3. If you're at 3, it could be 5 or 6. All situational dependent. But if you attack those things, especially the quality angle, and got at that cost of quality problem, increased your productivity. I mean, I can honestly look everybody in the eye and tell you when I was director of implementation at Donnelly in North America, we increased our productivity double digits annually for 5 years in a row when I was there. The number was as low as 10.1 and as high as 12.3. But in terms of our pieces per person per hour, with a constant mix of what we were producing, it's a pretty constant mix, we were able to achieve double-digit productivity gains in terms of our productivity. Reliable delivery, if you do this correctly, and safety and morale, it all comes together in zone 4, but you have to be very conscious of making sure you're moving from zone 1 to zone 4. I don't catch many people in zone 3. I catch everybody in zone 2 when they get stuck. And the Shingo Prize Institute, I had a conversation with their operational director. They've actually surveyed about 1,000 companies now. They find something very similar. People go into their lean journey and they get this kind of, he calls it the S curve. They get some initial bang for the buck, and that they plateau for 5 or 8 years and don't go anywhere. And only very few, less than 20% of the companies they survey, 15-20%, get up into what I called zone 4. He called it a sideways S curve. So he has empirical evidence to back up my anecdotal evidence. I'm going to have to go short on this, but when I visited Hickson Sheet Metal Finishing, there were some questions that I said, these are interest of us. Could you at least spend a minute on it? And just quickly, I will. Can we learn from other industries? Can we do benchmarking and get better? My answer is yes, but I'm not going to give you the answer that you probably are expecting. When I learn from other industries, I want you to study their failures. I want you to look at Toyota failures. I want you to look at other people practicing lean that are not getting results. A tier 1 company called Delphi, big lean program, went belly up. It's healthy to study what failed in lean. Just make sure you don't repeat those mistakes. And the benchmarking theme, if you want to go look at somebody and compare yourself, okay, but the most important benchmark is yourself, year to year, quarter to quarter, month to month, week to week. There's nothing more important than benchmarking yourself in terms of improvements. Some people say, well, how do we get early momentum and success and operator buy-in in this? And this is the only time I'll say, well, maybe you violate the 80-20 rule. Okay, maybe you do have to do some showy things on the small end of the Pareto chart and get some of those early wins quick wins in face, to show people that change is here and can be different. And a lot of this, I think, ties in with the TWI stuff that I talked about. The change went earlier in Toyota and easier in the 1950s and 60s on the tail end of this TWI implementation program. Toyota laid off a third of the workforce in 1951 to survive when they had their near bankruptcy experience in Japan. 2,146 employees were laid off. It was 1/3 of the company back then. It was not a popular company to drive improvement, yet Taiichi Ohno and Eiji Toyota were able to do it in that environment by building early momentum and getting buy-in. And I'm convinced that a part of it was this TWI program, transferring some skills into the workforce and putting clear expectations on them that here's what I expect for you in terms of improvement, and here's the skills I'm going to give you to help me do that. Some people ask me, well, about unique cases, we're special. And if I had a nickel for every time somebody told me they were a unique case or special, I'd be retired by now. We are all unique, we are all special. But then at the end of the day, do you have an on-time delivery problem? Do you have a quality problem? Do you have morale problems? Do you have safety problems? Do you have productivity problems? Do your customers wants to get better? Everybody nods their head and says, yeah. So, okay, yes, we're all unique, but guess what? We all got the same problems. So pat yourself on the back if that gives you any comfort. Degrees of outsourcing in the whole lean movement. Something is interesting that Toyota's been rock solid on one thing, that from the 1950s, 60s forward, they've been 30% internal parts and 70% externally sourced, and that has not changed. GM was the opposite. They were 70% internal for a long time and 30% outsourced, and that was way too much on the internal side for them, which they spun off Delphi and Ford spun off Visteon, and this outsourcing thing in the automotive industry started 15 years ago. Toyota has not changed off that percentage. And the truth is that they believe on that 30%, they have to be better than the competition. So the engines, the transmission, the stamped body panels, the paint, the plastics, certain things, they will not outsource. It's just too important for productivity and quality. But the head of purchasing at Toyota, I asked him about this. He said, look, I cannot build a long-term competitive advantage on outsourcing. I'm no better at purchasing on those 70% than GM, Ford, Chrysler, or anybody. He says it's just in fact, they're probably better at it than we are. They're probably more ruthless at it than we are. But on these 30%, I can build a wall. Okay, I can build a castle, and I can defend my territory on these 30%, be very good at reliability, be very good at quality, and I can build a tremendous advantage on the 30%, which we're going to keep in-house. And even to this day, if you look at the footprints of Toyota facilities, they almost never outsource certain things. And it was becoming pretty clear, even at the tail end of my McKinsey days, this outsourcing pendulum was starting to reach the maximum benefits and eventually going to come back, that people just weren't getting all the benefits they expected, that the supply chain became too long, qualities became hard to manage, you couldn't get answers overnight, there was tons of stuff on a boat from China, and the numbers for outsourcing, although still positive and still a lot of companies had to do it, the returns weren't as big as they thought. And if I can believe the stuff I read in Business Week, which sometimes I take with a grain of salt, that the wages are increasing at such a rate in China and some countries that this wage differential, what I call the spreadsheet logic for outsourcing, I think that's going to evaporate over the next decade faster than people think. There was a question about how fast is fast enough in terms of improvement, and I think they meant this in two sense. And honestly, the answer is you got to be good yesterday, and there's nothing I can do that change that equation for you. The world's flatter, the economy's difficult, the global competition's higher. But some people were saying that, look, Boeing or Northrop Grumman or whoever it was, want us to deliver all to go faster. And I think you do have to be careful with that there. That Toyota was pretty good at orchestrating suppliers. If A ships to B, ships to C, to D to E, and then to Toyota. We didn't tell all five to go faster necessarily. That it did make sense to get all those suppliers in a room and draw the map of where the lead time is chewed up, where the problems are, and say strategically these are the 2 or 3 places in the entire chain that need to go faster. If you tell everybody to go faster, it's not a wrong answer, but it's the old 10 guys rowing a boat. If everybody rows faster, the boat's not necessarily going to go faster. You start going a strange direction. And people ask me about reports of Toyota's death, and it's kind of like the Mark Twain joke that the reports of my death have been somewhat exaggerated in the press. My friend Jeff Liker has written a very interesting book called Toyota Under Fire, about the crisis they just went through and how it really got blown up in the press, bigger than it was. Yeah, Toyota did have problems, not nearly the extent the way the press blew them up. There was nothing in Europe, nothing in Japan. It was mainly a North American problem in the supply base. My friend actually runs the Toyota plant that Ono used to, the Kamigo engine plant, one of my former supervisors. And I called him in the middle of this, and as a joke, I said, so what's your CPK now? I guess you guys are all screwed up. I read in the newspaper. He goes, yeah, I'm 5 ppm to my final assembly customer, the vehicle plant. And that's on an engine, most engine assembly, the most complex thing with tolerances measured in microns for the cylinder bore and the journals and things like that. So internally, I think Toyota's fine. I think they do struggle with their supply base, especially in North America. So, look, general advice. I wish I had the answer for you to cure world hunger, cure cancer, or et cetera, but best I can do for you is, look, those 8 principles I give you, keep those in mind. If you like the 10 shingle points better, refer to those. Follow your SCA roadmap, but diligently check results, and if you're not getting results, stop and ask why. That's the most important thing you can do. Strategy and execution alignment have to be figured out. You can have the greatest strategy in the world, but if you can't execute on it, doesn't matter. Senior leadership needs to be involved. I'm not saying the CEO has to personally lead everything. It's not impossible. You have too much on your plate sometimes, but A.G. Toyota was vice president of Toyota. Mr. Ono was a middle manager when they got started, but they eventually wound up in very senior leadership positions of the company. Somebody senior has to be leading this from the front. It's like the Army joke. You can't lead an army from the rear. The rank and file don't respect leaders that lead from the rear. They like the patents who get out in front. Okay. Relentlessly, company-wide focus. I only talked about operation today, but the truth is Toyota finds a way to improve in IT, HR, purchasing, product development, and every department they have. It's just production that gets all the attention for some reason. Then the number one thing we got to get better at is just relentless execution of the PDA cycle. And the crazy thing about this is North American. It's Stewart, it's Deming, it's stuff we taught the Japanese in the 50s and 60s. But if you ask Toyota what their management system is, they basically say, well, it's basically adherence to the PDCA cycle in every aspect of our business. They've translated that slightly in recent years and just say, hey, it's Kaizen and respect for people to simplify the message and get out of all the buzzwords. It's even for them when they go overseas, it's a little bit difficult. But they say, look, we practice Kaizen, we practice respect for people, and if you do these two well, we'll be more successful in our competition. So that, in a nutshell, is what I can tell you in about 45 minutes. If there's any time for a brief question, which I don't have, do I? Okay, apologize I ran through that right at 45 minutes, but if there's 1 or 2 questions, I'd be happy to try and answer those. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned the supervisors was a weakness at some point, and I think at our organization, we may be at that point as well. We've promoted a few people in the supervisory slot. We've promoted some lead men, and we have a new senior supervisor. So any insights or suggestions as to the training of that? We can pull somebody out and have them do lean or Kaizens for 6 months. Any insights?
So Toyota had the same problem, and Toyota facilities overseas struggle with this. And the starting point for them is you can do the Kaizen special events kind of things, but it's usually limited to a few people. Across the board, what they do now is pre-select people to become, team leaders, et cetera, and put them through certain training. This course called Job Instruction Training, Job Relations Training, and Job Methods Training, and see how well they do at those 3 courses, JI, JR, and JM. And if you just Google TWI, training within industry, you can start to find some stuff. My website is called, I just put it up here. If you have to dig around in my documents section, but there's a website called Art of Lean. The instructor's manuals are on there. Nobody can copyright it. There's people who try and charge you money for them, but it was created by the Department of Defense in the United States. It's in public domain, so I just put them on my website for anybody that wants to download them. And I would start by thinking hard about doing something in those areas, how to teach, how to lead, and how to make small improvements within your area. It's like minor Kaizen and lots of good things. Call it the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yes?
The Supplier Advisory Council's been kicking around some ideas about actually putting together, taking some of the organizations within our membership and trying to work together in a supply chain effort. And then Bill Alderman asked a question to the panel yesterday. Can we actually, what everybody wants to make somebody else carry the inventory. Can we actually get a value stream going where there's only inventory in certain places, and that's by intention?
Yeah, so inventory is a reflection of lead time. And if your lead time is so long, we can actually do some back-of-the-envelope calculations and then theoretically quantify a minimum. I mean, it takes some back-of-the-envelope calculations and 80-20 estimations. But I think there's a theoretical minimum that can be calculated, and we compare ourselves, are we at that minimum or not? And if we're not, then we come down closer to that minimum. But I also tell you, you earn the right to take out inventory by fixing problems. A lot of people, and I think this was a big mistake in the 80s that GM and Ford and a couple other companies made, that, well, Toyota's got less inventory. We saw it. You know, 2 hours in final assembly, 2 hours between engine and the final assembly plant. Well, let's take out our inventory, expose the rocks. All you do is drive the ship into the rocks. If you do that, you have to earn the right to reduce that inventory by fixing the quality problems, fixing the downtime problems, and standardizing the work practices. And then I'd say that the flip side of the coin is you earn the right to take out the inventory. And this is one thing I kick myself about. I'm part of the Lean Enterprise Institute. My friend John Shook and Mike Rother wrote that Learning to See value stream mapping workbook. And I wrote the follow-up, which was a deeper dive, the just-in-time creating level pull part of it. That I really, really wish that Jim, Womack, and LAI had sounded the importance before that you earn the right to take out inventory, you know, by shrinking your lead time, and you earn the right to shrink your lead time by fixing a lot of these process problems that we have. Yeah.
Do you think, in light of the recent events with the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown, that they may rethink having that one best supplier and have to maybe pay attention to duplication in multiple places?
Yeah. The truth is, Toyota does dual source everything. There's an A and a B. Because a lot of the times, you know, for a Camry, there's 2 or 3 lines, and they won't put all their eggs in one basket. So in Japan, the philosophy was always the dual source, actually. The assumption a lot of people think is it's single source, and in North America is there's usually a primary. But almost always, when you look across the company, okay, maybe Johnson Controls is making it in the United States, but they've got Denso in Japan or Denso of USA that can also make that. But to your point, yeah, there is some self-reflection going on that for the electricity problems. They're talking about shutting down. You know, Aichi Prefecture is pretty far from the region affected. There was no disruption with Toyota. Production was back to normal within days. Very few suppliers, even Tier 3, were near the plant that had the problems. But there's another plant, I forget the name of it, that the nuclear plant that they're afraid has the same design flaws, and the government wants to shut it down. And if they shut that plant down, there could be rolling brownouts that would affect Toyota. And now it's like, oh God, what do we do now? You know, it's a problem. They're reflecting on it. Do I think they'll fundamentally change? A little bit, not a ton in the end. If anything, you know, Toyota, the funny thing, Toyota until recently had not opened a new plant in Japan in 18 years. They opened this plant called the Ohira facility, and that was a big event in Japan because it was the first plant they'd opened in 18 years. But for the last 18 years, all their growth has come overseas.
Hi. One of the issues that we deal with in aerospace is supply chain management, and I think you'd mentioned that Toyota had some issues with their supply chain management. So in the interest of learning from failures, what can we learn, or what advice can you give us in helping us achieve supply chain management?
Yeah, they just grew too fast in the United States. They, you know, for the long time, the mantra in the company truly was quality first and that growth will follow secondly. I think they got their management priorities out of whack. A man named Hiroshi Okuda, who was actually a finance person, became CEO of the company, and his operational guy was Fujio Cho, who was a very capable man. And they managed a very difficult balancing act where they opened and expanded things really, really rapidly. And I actually said around the year 2000, I go, you can't grow that fast. I mean, I know what it takes to open and start up a Toyota plant. That's what I did for the first, you know, period of my life. You cannot open plants as fast as they were doing it. We didn't have the bandwidth, the talent, and the depth to do it. And yet, year after year, they did it until, you know, about 2008. And I believe there's some natural limits to growth, okay? You can only grow so fast, and I don't know what that number is, situational dependent, but Toyota clearly, you know, went beyond their means. And it wasn't on the internal parts, it was on the external parts that got them. These stupid little things, like there's nothing easier in a car to make than an accelerator, you know, accelerator pedal. I mean, how can you make an engine hold a couple microns of tolerance at 5 ppm and screw up a pedal? You know, that's what former employees like me thought. And what the hell are you doing? It was just growing too fast. But it didn't happen in Japan. It didn't happen in Europe. That pedal and that design was only on American models with certain combination of things caused it to occur. So just don't grow too fast. Okay, well, I appreciate the opportunity. Look, I'm local, so if it doesn't entail getting on an airplane, if you ever want to just talk shop for an hour, you can get my contact information through SCA. I'd be happy to come by, look at what you're doing, and just talk shop with anybody, like, with the caveat being you're here in Southern California. I don't have to get on an airplane.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.